The cold concrete of my prison cell was the last thing I felt before my 28-year-old body gave out, taking the fall for my sister's crimes. A heartbeat later, my lungs filled with the scent of fresh lavender. I was 10 again. This time I'd be the one holding the matches. The concrete floor of the federal penitentiary was the last thing I felt. My lungs were drowning in fluid pneumonia, ravaging my frail body after 2 years of medical neglect. At 28, I was serving a 10-year sentence for massive corporate fraud and embezzlement crimes meticulously orchestrated by my older sister, Savannah. When the federal investigators closed in on our family's empire, Harrington Holdings, my father Richard needed a sacrificial lamb to save his golden child and his legacy. He forged my signature. My mother Evelyn wore vintage Chanel to my sentencing and didn't shed a single tear. Savannah just smiled. As the darkness took me, I didn't pray for peace. I prayed for vengeance. Then the sharp, suffocating smell of smoke vanished, replaced by the cloying scent of lavender vanilla. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. There were no iron bars, no peeling grey paint. Above me was a plush pink canopy. I was lying in a twin bed, swathed in Egyptian cotton. I threw off the covers, my hands trembling as I stared at them. They weren't the calloused, bruised hands of an inmate. They were tiny, unblemished and soft. I scrambled to the vanity mirror across the room. Staring back at me was a pale, wide-eyed 10-year-old girl with mousy brown hair. My chest heaved. I glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. 12/14, 2004. I collapsed onto the plush carpet, a ragged, hysterical laugh tearing from my throat. I was 10. I was back in my childhood home in Westport, Connecticut. And I knew exactly what today was. October 14th was the day the Harrington family officially decided I was the defective child. In my past life, this was the day the historic wooden guest house on our estate burned to the ground. Savannah, who was 15 at the time, had been smoking stolen cigarettes with her delinquent friends. When the fire got out of control, her friends fled. Savannah ran into my room, shoved the silver Zippo lighter into my innocent hands, and told me to hold it for her. When our parents burst in, Savannah was crying, pointing at me, screaming that she had tried to stop me, but I was obsessed with the flames. I had been too shocked and eager for my sister's love to defend myself properly. I stammered, I cried, and I held on to the lighter. That night was the beginning of my end. It led to a childhood of psychiatrists, heavy medication for behavioral issues, and my permanent status as the family scapegoat. Not this time. I heard the frantic crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside, followed by the heavy slam of the back door. The smell of ash and burning pine drifted up the grand staircase. My bedroom door burst open. Savannah stood there, her blonde hair singed at the ends, her expensive cashmere sweater reeking of smoke. Her eyes were wide with panic, but beneath the fear, I saw the familiar sociopathic calculation that would eventually frame me for a federal crime 13 years later. "Juliet," she hissed, rushing toward me. She pulled a heavy engraved silver Zippo from her pocket. "Juliet, you have to help me. Just hold this. Please, if Mom finds out, she'll kill me. Just hold it for a second." In my previous life, I had reached out, desperate to be the good sister, desperate to be included in her secrets. Now, looking at the face of the woman who would one day watch me rot in a cell, I felt a surge of pure, icy adrenaline. I didn't reach for the lighter. Instead, I took a step back, my eyes widening in feigned terror. I let out a blood-curdling, ear-piercing scream. "Mommy, Daddy, help!" I shrieked at the top of my lungs, scrambling backward until my spine hit the wall. Savannah froze, her jaw dropping in shock. "Shut up, Juliet! Shut up! What are you doing?" She lunged toward me, trying to force the lighter into my pajama pocket. I dodged her knocking over my bedside lamp with a dramatic crash. "Fire! She's got fire!" I screamed again, tears springing to my eyes, real tears drawn from the well of a lifetime of agony. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Richard and Evelyn Harrington appeared in the doorway, breathless and panicked, the glow of the raging guest house fire illuminating the window behind them. "What is going on?" Richard roared. His eyes darted from my terrified, weeping form, huddled in the corner, to his golden child, Savannah. Savannah was standing in the middle of the room, her hands covered in soot, desperately trying to hide the silver Zippo behind her back. But it was too late. The heavy metallic clink of the lighter hitting the hardwood floor echoed through the sudden silence. She had dropped it in her panic. Evelyn gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "Savannah, what is that?" It's Juliet's." Savannah stammered, her voice pitching high and desperate. "She was playing with it." I tried to take it from her. I curled my knees to my chest, sobbing violently, burying my face in my hands. "She's lying," I wailed, sounding like the terrified 10-year-old I physically was. She came in smelling like smoke. She tried to make me touch it. "Daddy," she said she was going to burn my room next. "I did not!" Savannah shrieked, her perfect facade cracking. Richard stepped forward, his face purple with rage. He looked at the lighter on the floor, his own custom Zippo from his study, then at Savannah's soot-stained hands and singed hair. Then he looked at me, perfectly clean, huddled in the corner. The evidence was undeniable. For the first time in her pristine, pampered life, Savannah Harrington was caught red-handed. Richard grabbed Savannah by the arm, dragging her out of the room. "You stupid, careless girl. Do you have any idea what you've done? That guest house is a historic landmark." Evelyn rushed after them, her voice shrill as she tried to defend her favorite daughter. "Richard, be gentle. She's just a teenager." I sat alone in the quiet of my bedroom, the sounds of my father's roaring and my sister's wailing echoing down the hall. I slowly lowered my hands from my face. The tears were gone. In the reflection of the fallen vanity mirror, the 10-year-old girl smiled. It was a cold, hollow expression. The first domino had fallen, and I was going to make sure the rest of them crushed this family into dust. The aftermath of the fire shifted the tectonic plates of the Harrington household. The guest house was a total loss, costing Richard hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages that the insurance refused to fully cover due to negligent arson. Savannah was grounded for 3 months, her trust fund allowance frozen, and she was forced to attend weekly therapy sessions. Evelyn, desperate to protect her flawless social image, spun a web of lies to her country club friends, claiming faulty wiring had caused the blaze. But behind closed doors, the tension was suffocating. For the first time, I wasn't the problem. I was the traumatized victim. I played the part to perfection. I developed a fear of the dark, forcing Evelyn to buy me expensive nightlights. I flinched whenever Savannah entered a room, ensuring that Richard saw my terror, which only fueled his anger toward his eldest daughter. I became a ghost in the house, silent, observant, and completely invisible. And because I was invisible, I could see everything. At 10 years old, no one suspects you of espionage. The staff, including our longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, ignored me as they gossiped. My parents left their private documents strewn about, assuming I couldn't comprehend them. But behind my little girl eyes was the mind of a former corporate accountant who had run the books for Harrington Holdings. I knew their secrets. I just needed the physical proof to weaponize them. My first target was my mother, Evelyn. Evelyn Harrington presented herself as the epitome of suburban grace. She was the head of the charity gala committee, a devoted wife, and a fiercely loyal mother, at least to Savannah. But I knew the truth. I knew that for the past 3 years, Evelyn had been having a passionate, reckless affair with Arthur Pendleton, my father's business partner, and supposedly his best friend. In my past life, the affair had been swept under the rug when Richard eventually found out years later. They settled it privately to protect the company's stock. I wasn't going to let them have a private resolution this time. I wanted a public massacre. It was mid-November, the week before the annual Thanksgiving gala that Evelyn hosted at our estate. The house was a flurry of caterers, florists, and decorators. Evelyn was stressed barking orders at Mrs. Gable and furiously organizing guest lists in her study. I knew from my past life that Evelyn kept a prepaid burner phone hidden in the false bottom of her velvet jewelry box. It was her direct line to Arthur. One Tuesday afternoon, while Evelyn was at a spa appointment and Savannah was at her mandated therapy session, I slipped into the master suite. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm. I wasn't a scared child anymore. I was a surgeon, and this house was my operating table. I opened the heavy mahogany closet doors, stepped up on a velvet stool, and pulled down the ornate jewelry box. My small fingers expertly found the hidden latch I had accidentally discovered when I was 16 in my past life. The false bottom popped open. There it was, a sleek silver flip phone. I turned it on. No password. Evelyn was arrogant. She never thought anyone would dare snoop through her things. I scrolled through the messages. They were sickeningly romantic, heavily detailed, and explicitly clear about their betrayals of Richard. I didn't take the phone. That would alert her. Instead, I crept into Richard's home office. My father was a man of strict routine. Every evening he poured himself a glass of scotch, sat at his desk and reviewed his daily planner. I took one of Evelyn's distinct, monogrammed stationery cards, the expensive heavy cream paper she used for formal invitations. Using my left hand to disguise my handwriting, making it look like a rushed adult scrawl rather than a child's neat print, I wrote a single line. Ask Arthur about the silver phone in Evelyn's jewelry box. He misses her. I slipped the card into the middle of Richard's daily planner, right on the page for tomorrow's date. Then I went back to my room, opened my math homework, and waited. The explosion happened at 8:00 p.m. the following night. I was sitting at the kitchen island eating a bowl of cereal when the heavy oak doors of Richard's study slammed open with a force that shook the walls. Evelyn. Richard's voice was a guttural roar echoing through the marble foyer. Upstairs, a door opened. Richard, what on earth is that yelling? Get down here. Now, I kept my eyes glued to my math textbook, but my ears strained to catch every glorious second. I heard Evelyn's hurried footsteps on the stairs, followed by a heavy, terrifying silence in the foyer. What is this? Richard's voice was dangerously low now, the calm before a hurricane. I don't know what you're talking about, Evelyn stammered, her voice trembling. It's just a piece of stationery. Open the box, Evelyn, Richard demanded. Richard, you're scaring me. Open the damn jewelry box. The sound of shattering glass echoed from the hallway, as Richard presumably threw something. A few moments later, I heard the heavy, desperate sobs of my mother. She had been caught. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, hurried into the kitchen, her eyes wide with panic. She saw me sitting there and rushed over, her hands fluttering. Oh, sweetie, don't listen to that. Let's go up to your room. I looked up at her, making my eyes wide and innocent. Why is Daddy so mad at Mommy, Mrs. Gable? Did Mommy play with fire, too? Mrs. Gable's face paled. She ushered me up the back staircase, completely unaware that the docile child she was guiding had just ignited a bomb that would shatter the Harrington marriage forever. Later that night, the house was dead silent. Richard had packed a bag and left for a hotel. Evelyn was locked in her room, crying hysterically. My bedroom door creaked open. Savannah stepped inside. The shadows hid her face, but the moonlight catching her eyes revealed a venomous, unhinged fury. She had lost her father's favor, and now her perfect family was crumbling. She walked slowly to the foot of my bed. I sat up, clutching my blanket, projecting the image of a frightened sister. "I don't know how," Savannah whispered, her voice laced with poison. "I don't know what you did, you little freak. But you ruined everything. I'm going to make you pay for this." In my past life, a threat like that from Savannah would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and self-loathing. I would have begged for her forgiveness for something I didn't even do. But sitting in the dark, bathed in the moonlight, I didn't shrink away. I let the mask of the innocent 10-year-old slip just for a fraction of a second. I tilted my head, looking straight into her eyes, and let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. "You can try Savannah," I whispered back, my voice steady and devoid of childish innocence. "But I'm just getting started." Savannah recoiled, as if she had been slapped, a flicker of genuine unease crossing her face before she turned and fled my room. I lay back down, against my pillows, the sounds of Evelyn's muffled weeping drifting through the walls. The Harrington Empire was built on lies, ego, and my suffering. Now the foundation was cracked. Next I was going to tear down the walls. Winter hit Westport with a bitter, biting chill. Inside the Harrington estate, the atmosphere was even colder. The divorce proceedings between Richard and Evelyn were toxic, spilling out of mediation rooms and into the sprawling, empty hallways of our home. Richard won temporary occupancy of the estate, while Evelyn was banished to a leased condo downtown. Her social standing evaporated overnight. The country club elite, the same women who had kissed her cheeks at galas, now whispered behind their hands when she walked past the local boutiques. With Evelyn gone, and Savannah trapped in a spiral of teenage rebellion and mandated therapy, my father turned his ruthless focus entirely on salvaging Harrington Holdings. His betrayal by Arthur Pendleton wasn't just personal, it was a massive liability. In the corporate world, weakness was a dinner bell for sharks, and Richard Harrington was bleeding in the water. I watched him from the edges of the room. The scent of expensive scotch and stale cigar smoke became his permanent aura. He fired Arthur, leading to a vicious legal battle over shareholder rights and company assets. What Richard didn't know was that his quiet 10-year-old daughter, the one who sat neatly on the living room rug, completing her math worksheets, knew exactly where the financial bodies were buried. In my previous life, it was this exact corporate war that led to my imprisonment. To hide the massive debts and illegal offshore transfers used to buy Arthur out of the company, Richard and Savannah had created a web of shell corporations. When the Federal Election Commission and the SEC finally caught wind of the discrepancies 13 years later, Savannah, acting as CFO, seamlessly shifted the paper trail onto me. This time I was going to detonate the bomb while the shrapnel could only hit them. The second week of December brought a heavy blizzard, trapping everyone indoors. Richard had locked himself in his study, shouting at his defense attorneys over the phone. I waited until the grandfather clock in the foyer struck 2 in the morning. The house was dead silent, save for the howling wind rattling the antique window panes. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent against the cold hardwood. I wore a pair of thin latex cleaning gloves I had stolen from Mrs. Gable's supply closet. I crept down the sweeping staircase and pressed my ear against the heavy oak door of the study. Nothing but the faint hum of the heating vent. I turned the brass knob. It clicked open. The room smelled of old paper and leather. I bypassed the main desk and walked straight toward the oil painting of the harbor hanging on the far wall. I reached behind the heavy gilded frame and felt for the small recessed dial of the wall safe. In my first life, my father had drunkenly bragged about this safe to Savannah during a Christmas party, boasting that the combination was the exact date he made his first million reversed. I had been standing in the corner, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres completely ignored. 09-15-92, reversed 295190. I turned the cold metal dial. 2 right 9, left 5, right 1, left 9, right 0, left. With a soft, heavy thunk, the locking mechanism disengaged. I swung the small steel door open. Inside sat a stack of velvet jewelry pouches, a backup handgun, and a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was the physical master copy of the offshore accounts, the very accounts he was currently using to hide assets from Evelyn in the divorce, and from Arthur in the corporate buyout. I didn't take the ledger. A missing book would trigger an immediate panic, allowing Richard to destroy the digital backups and move the money. Instead, I pulled a small digital camera from my pajama pocket, a birthday gift Evelyn had given me 2 years ago, long forgotten. I spent the next 45 minutes carefully photographing every single page of the ledger. Account numbers, wire transfer dates, illicit payouts to city inspectors. Every flash of the camera was a nail in my father's coffin. When I was finished, I placed the ledger exactly as I found it, locked the safe, and straightened the painting. The next day, I used Savannah's discarded old laptop in the family room. She had carelessly left herself, logged into an old generic email account she used for signing up for fan forums. Connecting to the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi network, I attached the photographs of the ledger to a single email. I typed out 3 recipient addresses: the lead investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the editor of the Financial Crimes Division at the New York Times, and as a final stroke of poetic justice, Arthur Pendleton's ruthless defense attorney. The subject line was simple: Harrington Holdings, hidden asset ledger. I hit send. Then I wiped the laptop down with a microfiber cloth and walked away. The fallout was not immediate. It simmered for exactly 10 days. On December 22nd, the storm broke. I was eating breakfast at the kitchen island. Savannah was sullenly pushing a piece of toast around her plate, nursing a hangover she thought she was hiding. Richard was aggressively tapping his BlackBerry. Then the heavy crunch of tires on gravel broke the morning quiet. I looked out the bay window. A fleet of black SUVs had formed a barricade across our driveway. Men and women in dark windbreakers, emblazoned with yellow letters, FBI and SEC, were marching up the front steps. Richard looked up, the color draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "What the hell?" he muttered, dropping his phone. The front door didn't just open, it was forced. Heavy boots echoed like thunder across the marble foyer. "Richard Harrington. Federal agents, we have a warrant for your arrest and the seizure of this property." My father didn't fight. He stood up, his hands shaking violently, the arrogant titan of industry reduced to a trembling old man in a matter of seconds. As they read him his rights and locked the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists, his eyes darted frantically around the room, landing on Savannah. "Call the lawyers," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Savannah, call them now." But Savannah was frozen, her mouth open in a silent scream of terror, as agents began tearing through the house, seizing computers' files and freezing every asset attached to the Harrington name. I sat quietly on my stool, taking a slow sip of my orange juice. The orange tasted perfectly sweet. The empire was falling, and I had a front row seat. The collapse of Harrington Holdings was spectacular, broadcasted across every major news network for weeks. The leaked ledger provided undeniable proof of systemic fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Because the email had come from an IP address linked to our house, and from an account Savannah had created, Richard became convinced his own teenage daughter had sold him out to Arthur in a twisted act of vengeance for being grounded. From his holding cell, Richard completely cut Savannah off. He instructed his remaining heavily depleted legal team to freeze her trust fund, completely convinced she would use it to flee. Evelyn broke and, facing intense public humiliation, refused to take Savannah in. "I can barely afford this apartment," Evelyn had screamed over the phone when social services called. "She's a volatile teenager who started a fire, put her in a home, and just like that, the golden child became a burden. Because I was a 10-year-old minor with no criminal record and a well-documented history of being the quiet, traumatized victim of my sister's reckless behavior. The state intervened gently on my behalf. My father's estranged sister, her Aunt Carolyn, a pragmatic, kind woman who had been banished from the family years ago for marrying a public school teacher instead of a banker, stepped forward to take custody of me. But I had one last loose end to tie up before I left Westport forever. It was a bleak, grey Tuesday. The bank had officially foreclosed on the estate. Movers were packing up the last of the approved belongings. Savannah and I were in the empty, echoing grand foyer, waiting for our respective transports. Aunt Caroline was driving up from Pennsylvania for me. A social worker was coming to take Savannah to a state-run group home for troubled girls. Savannah looked awful. Her pristine blonde hair was greasy and matted. Her expensive clothes hung loosely on her frame. The arrogance that had defined her entire existence was completely shattered, replaced by a frantic, feral desperation. "You did this," she whispered, her voice scratching like sandpaper. She paced the marble floor, glaring at me. "I don't know how, but you did this. The email, the laptop. It was you." I sat on my small suitcase, my posture relaxed. I didn't bother putting on the terrified child act. There was no one left to perform for. "Did what, Savannah?" I asked calmly, my voice steady and mature, carrying the weight of the 28-year-old woman who had died in a cage because of her. "Did I force Dad to steal millions? Did I make Mum sleep with Arthur? Did I hand you that lighter in the guest house?" She stopped, pacing, her breath hitching. She stared at me, a profound, creeping horror dawning in her eyes as she truly looked at my face. She saw the cold, calculated emptiness there. She realized in that singular moment that the little sister she had tortured was completely gone, replaced by an apex predator she couldn't comprehend. "You're a monster," she breathed, taking a step back. I stood up, smoothing the front of my wool coat. "No," I replied softly, the sound carrying easily in the empty mansion. "I'm the consequence. For years, this family used me as a shield to protect its rotting core. You all thought I was weak because I chose to be kind, but kindness is a choice, Savannah. And I chose to stop." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her pale cheeks. She looked around the massive empty foyer, the grand chandelier above us, stripped of its light. She had nothing. No money, no parents, no future. The very fate she had callously condemned me to in my past life was now her permanent reality. "What am I supposed to do now?" She choked out, her voice cracking into a pathetic, childish whine. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt. Just the clean, absolute peace of a skill, finally balanced. "That sounds like a you problem," I said. Headlights swept across the frosted glass of the front doors. A modest, reliable sedan pulled into the circular driveway. Aunt Caroline stepped out, giving me a warm, hesitant wave through the glass. Behind her car, a white, state-issued van pulled up. The social worker had arrived. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. I didn't look back at Savannah as I walked out, the heavy oak doors stepping off the grand porch and into the crisp, biting winter air. I climbed into the passenger seat of Aunt Caroline's car. The heater was running blasting warm air that smelled faintly of vanilla and old paperbacks. "Ready to go, Juliet?" Aunt Caroline asked gently, putting the car in drive. I looked out the window. Savannah was being guided into the back of the state van. Her head hung low, a grey blanket wrapped around her shoulders. In the distance, the skeletal remains of the burned guest house stood stark against the grey sky. The Harrington legacy was dead, and I had my whole life ahead of me. Yes, I smiled, a genuine, true smile. I'm ready to go home. The Harrington family built their empire on lies, but they never expected the quiet scapegoat to light the match that burned it all down. Juliet's second chance proves that the best revenge isn't just surviving, it's rewriting the rules of the game. Did Juliet go too far? Or did her family get exactly what they deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, revenge-filled drama.